I'm Noelle, 34, and for most of my life, I've felt invisible to my own father. The man who barely acknowledged my existence growing up somehow transformed into the perfect dad for his stepdaughters after my parents divorced. Last month at a family gathering, I finally confronted him about this painful discrepancy, and everything exploded. The family is still dealing with the fallout. Before I share my story, where are you watching from today if you've ever felt replaced by a parent? Hit subscribe and let me know in the comments below. My childhood looked normal from the outside. We lived in a comfortable 2-story house in a suburban neighborhood outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. My father Thomas worked as an architect for a prestigious firm downtown, and my mother Grace was a dedicated nurse at the local hospital. To neighbors and friends, we probably seemed like the ideal American family, but behind closed doors, a different reality existed. Dad was physically present but emotionally absent. He moved through our house like a ghost, always preoccupied with blueprints, client calls, or his own thoughts. I remember watching him at the dining table night after night, hunched over his work, barely acknowledging when Mum or I would speak to him. Thomas Noelle got an A on her science project today. Mum would say, her voice tinged with forced cheerfulness. "That's nice," he'd mutter without looking up his response, so automatic it was clear he hadn't really heard what she said. The pattern repeated throughout my childhood. I performed in my first dance recital at age 7, wearing a purple tutu I'd been excited about for weeks. Mum sat in the front row, camera ready, while the seat next to her remained empty. Dad had promised he'd be there, but a client meeting ran late. This wasn't a one-time occurrence, but the beginning of a long string of absences. School plays, parent-teacher conferences, soccer games he'd committed to, but never showed for. My mother compensated as best she could. Grace was warm and affectionate, always ready with a hug or words of encouragement, but she worked long shifts at the hospital, often overnight, leaving me alone with a father who barely seemed to register my existence. "Your dad loves you very much," she would assure me. "He just shows it differently. Work is very important to him." I believed her at first. Children want to believe the best about their parents. But as I grew older, I started to question this explanation. If work was so important, why did he still find time for golf on Saturdays with his colleagues? Why could he remember every detail about a building project, but forget what grade I was in? I tried everything to gain his attention. When I was 8, I spent hours drawing a picture of a house, carefully adding details I'd heard him mention were important in architecture. I presented it to him one evening, standing nervously beside his desk. "Look, Dad, I designed a house like you do." He glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, Noelle, but the proportions are all wrong. Windows can't be that size." He handed it back and returned to his computer. I slipped away, the drawing crumpled in my small fist, tears burning behind my eyes. By the time I turned 10, I'd developed a strategy. I'd only approach him with questions that required minimal engagement. I'd learnt that asking about his day or trying to tell him about mine led nowhere, but practical requests sometimes got through. My 10th birthday stands out as particularly painful. Dad had promised to take me to Valley Fair, the amusement park I'd been begging to visit all summer. I'd been counting down the days, telling all my friends about our special father-daughter outing. The morning of my birthday, I came downstairs to find Mom making pancakes, her expression already apologetic. "Your father got called into work, sweetie. A big client is having problems with their design." I nodded, having expected this outcome despite my hopes. Mum tried to salvage the day with a trip to the mall and ice cream, but the disappointment lingered. When Dad came home that evening, he handed me a gift card in a plain envelope. "Sorry about today. You can use this to buy whatever you want." No hug, no real apology, and definitely no rescheduled trip to Valley Fair. As the years passed, I developed coping mechanisms. I retreated into books, finding fictional fathers who were present and loving. I started journaling, pouring my feelings onto pages since I couldn't express them to Dad. And I grew closer to Mum, who tried her best to fill both parental roles. I also began to notice the tension between my parents. The strained conversations, the way Mum would try to engage Dad in family matters, only to be shut down with short, dismissive responses. Their arguments increased in frequency, usually after I'd gone to bed, but the walls in our house were thin. "She needs her father Thomas, not just someone who pays the bills," Mum would plead. "I'm providing for this family. What more do you want from me?" He'd snap back. As a child, I internalized these conflicts. Maybe if I was smarter, more athletic, more interesting, Dad would want to spend time with me. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made me unlovable to my own father. These thoughts followed me throughout elementary and middle school, shaping my self-image in ways I wouldn't fully understand until much later. By the time I turned 14, the distance between my parents had grown into a chasm. They rarely spoke except about practical matters. Dad started spending weekends at the office claiming deadlines and important projects. Mum threw herself into extra shifts at the hospital. And I wandered around our increasingly silent house, feeling like the only witness to the slow collapse of our family. The summer I turned 15, the tension in our house became unbearable. The air felt heavy with unspoken words, and the silence between my parents stretched into days. I wasn't surprised when they called me into the living room one Sunday afternoon, their faces solemn. "Noelle, your father and I need to talk to you about something important." Mum began, her voice steady, but her hands fidgeting with her wedding ring. Dad sat stiffly on the opposite end of the couch, looking everywhere but at me. "Your mother and I have decided to separate," he said, his tone businesslike, as if discussing a change in the household budget, rather than the dissolution of our family. Despite suspecting this outcome for months, hearing the words spoken aloud sent a cold shock through my system. I remember nodding mechanically as they outlined the practical aspects of their decision. Dad would move to an apartment downtown close to his office. I would stay in the family home with Mum, maintaining my school routine with minimal disruption. "We'll work out a visitation schedule," Mum assured me. "You'll still see your father regularly." Dad nodded in agreement, though without any particular enthusiasm. "Of course," he added. "We'll figure it out." The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Dad seemed eager to separate our finances and establish new living arrangements. Within weeks, he had moved into a sleek one-bedroom apartment in a high-rise building with views of the Minneapolis skyline. The place reflected his personality, perfectly minimalist, functional, and devoid of warmth. My first weekend visit was awkward. Dad had set up a pull-out sofa in his office for me, an afterthought in a space clearly designed for a single person. He ordered takeout and asked generic questions about school while checking his phone throughout our conversation. By Sunday morning, he was already making excuses about needing to go into the office for a few hours. "You can watch TV or use the computer while I'm gone," he offered, already gathering his materials. "That's okay," I replied. "I should probably get home early to finish homework anyway." He looked relieved. "I'll drive you back now then." This pattern repeated for several months. The mandatory weekend visits became shorter and less frequent. Dad would call on Friday afternoons with last-minute work commitments that necessitated rescheduling. Sometimes we'd meet for a quick dinner instead of the full weekend. Other times visits would be cancelled altogether. Mum noticed the declining time with my father, but seemed hesitant to push the issue. "He's adjusting to his new life," she said. "Give him time." 8 months after the divorce finalised, Dad called with news. "I've met someone," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar lightness. "Her name is Veronica. She's a landscape architect I met through work. I'd like you to meet her next weekend." I agreed, more out of curiosity than enthusiasm. When Dad picked me up that Saturday, I immediately noticed the difference in him. He seemed energized, more engaged, asking about my week without checking his phone. It was disorienting to see this version of my father, one I'd rarely encountered. Veronica was waiting at an upscale restaurant downtown. She was tall and elegant, with warm brown eyes and a ready smile. She greeted me with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about my hobbies and school subjects. Throughout lunch, I watched in confusion as my typically reserved father laughed and shared stories, his hand occasionally reaching for Veronica's across the table. "I hope we can get to know each other better, Noelle," Veronica said as lunch ended. "Thomas talks about you all the time." I nodded politely while wondering what exactly he could have told her, given how little he knew about my life. 2 weeks later, Dad called with another update. Veronica has 2 daughters from her previous marriage. Lily is 11 and Emma is 9. We thought it might be nice for all of us to spend some time together this weekend. Maybe go to the Science Museum. The museum visit marked my first meeting with my future stepsisters. Lily and Emma were bubbly and outgoing, clearly excited about the prospect of having a new dad and an older stepsister. They chatted enthusiastically about their school friends and hobbies, while Dad listened with an attentiveness I'd never experienced from him. "Watch this, Thomas," Emma called, running toward an interactive exhibit. To my astonishment, Dad immediately followed, helping her understand how the demonstration worked. His face animated as he explained the scientific principles involved. Later, when Lily mentioned struggling with a math concept at school, Dad offered, "I could help you with that. We could set aside some time this week." I felt like I was watching a stranger wearing my father's face. This engaged, patient, interested man bore no resemblance to the father I'd known my entire life. The contrast was so stark it left me speechless. The following weekend, Dad invited me to dinner at Veronica's house. It was a spacious suburban home with a meticulously landscaped yard that showcased Veronica's professional skills. Inside the walls displayed numerous family photos, evidence of a life filled with celebrations and milestones. During dinner, Emma mentioned a homework assignment on architectural styles. What happened next felt like a surreal dream. Dad pushed his plate aside, grabbed paper and pencil from a nearby drawer, and spent 20 minutes sketching examples of Gothic and Romanesque architecture, explaining the differences to Emma with enthusiasm and patience. I sat frozen, my food untouched, as memories flashed through my mind. Me at 12, struggling with a similar assignment, approaching Dad in his home office, only to be told, "I'm busy now, Noelle. Use the encyclopedia." After dinner, Dad helped clear the table and load the dishwasher, domestic tasks I'd rarely seen him perform at our house. When Lily mentioned a father-daughter dance at her school the following month, Dad immediately marked it on his calendar, promising to rent a suit for the occasion. As the evening progressed, I withdrew into silence, feeling increasingly like an unwelcome observer of this happy family tableau that somehow included my father but excluded me. When Dad drove me home, I stared out the window, fighting back tears. "Veronica and the girls are great, aren't they?" he asked, oblivious to my distress. "Yeah, great," I managed to reply. Over the next few months, I watched as Dad and Veronica's relationship deepened. They moved in together 6 months after meeting, blending their households with an ease that seemed unfair given the years of tension in my parents' marriage. Dad seamlessly integrated into his role as stepfather, attending school events, helping with homework, and creating special outings for the girls. Meanwhile, our own father-daughter relationship continued to deteriorate. I began making excuses to skip weekend visits, claiming school projects or plans with friends. Dad rarely questioned these excuses or pushed for alternative arrangements. Our interactions dwindled to occasional phone calls that grew shorter and more perfunctory each time. When Dad and Veronica announced their engagement a year after meeting, I felt the last threads of hope for a meaningful relationship with my father beginning to snap. The man who was planning a new family had never fully participated in his first one, and the injustice of it burned inside me. By 17, I'd perfected the art of emotional compartmentalization. I poured my energy into academics and extracurricular activities, building a life that required minimal interaction with my father. I joined the yearbook committee, debate club, and volleyball team, filling my calendar so completely that weekend visits became logistically impossible. "I can't this weekend, Dad," became my standard response to his increasingly infrequent invitations. "I have a tournament/deadline/study group." He accepted these excuses without question, perhaps relieved to be freed from the obligation of our awkward time together. My high school graduation ceremony crystallized the new family dynamic. Mum sat in the front row, beaming with pride, having taken a rare day off from the hospital. Dad arrived 15 minutes late, slipping into a seat in the back row with Veronica, Lily, and Emma in tow. After the ceremony, he offered a brief congratulation and a gift card, before explaining they needed to leave early for Lily's piano recital. "Sorry we can't stay for your celebration," he said, checking his watch. "Lily's been practicing for months for this recital." I nodded, unsurprised yet still hurt. "That's fine. Thanks for coming." The contrast became even more pronounced when Lily turned 16 a few months later. Dad organised an elaborate surprise party, renting a venue and hiring a photographer to capture the moment. I learned about this not from my father, but through social media, where Veronica had posted dozens of pictures showing Dad presenting Lily with car keys tied with a bow. The caption read, "Thomas surprising our girl with her first car. No father could be more devoted." I stared at the images of my father, arms wrapped proudly around his stepdaughter, displaying an emotional openness I'd never experienced from him. The physical evidence of his capacity for fatherly love only confirmed what I'd suspected. The problem had never been his inability to be a good father, but his unwillingness to be one to me. My mother noticed my withdrawal after the graduation. "You need to talk to someone about this, Noelle," she urged. "Keeping these feelings bottled up isn't healthy." She arranged for me to see a therapist, Dr. Harper, who specialized in family dynamics and adolescent issues. Our weekly sessions became a lifeline as I navigated the complex emotions surrounding my father's transformation. "Why can he be this person for them, but not for me?" I asked during one particularly difficult session. Dr. Harper's response was measured. "Sometimes people change with time and different circumstances. It doesn't excuse his behavior toward you, but understanding it might help you process your feelings." These sessions helped, but they didn't erase the pain. As college application season approached, I found myself drawn to schools far from Minnesota. NYU offered both geographic distance and the anonymity of a big city where I wouldn't constantly be reminded of my fractured family. When my acceptance letter arrived, Mum organised a small celebration dinner. I invited Dad out of obligation rather than desire for his presence. He attended, offering generic congratulations before steering the conversation toward Emma's recent science fair victory. "She's showing real promise in STEM fields," he said proudly. "I've been helping her explore engineering concepts. She might follow me into architecture." The irony wasn't lost on me. Throughout my childhood, Dad had never once suggested I might be interested in his profession or offered to share his knowledge. Yet here he was actively mentoring his stepdaughter in his field. During a visit to Dad's house, shortly before leaving for college, I noticed something that cemented my decision to create distance. While using the bathroom, I spotted his wallet on the counter. A moment of curiosity led me to open it, where I found several photos of Lily and Emma tucked into the photo sleeves. There wasn't a single picture of me. That fall, I moved to New York with a mixture of excitement and relief. The 200 miles between Minneapolis and Manhattan provided a buffer that allowed me to begin healing. I called home regularly to speak with Mum, but my conversations with Dad became increasingly rare and brief. "How's school?" he'd ask. "Fine," I'd reply. "Busy with classes." "Good, good. Well, take care then." These exchanges rarely lasted more than 5 minutes and left me feeling hollow each time. As holidays approached, I made excuses to stay in New York. "Flights are too expensive," or "I have a paper due right after break." Mum would express disappointment but understanding. Dad would accept my decision without protest, sometimes seeming relieved. During my sophomore year, I declined to come home for Christmas, instead accepting an invitation from my roommate to join her family in Connecticut. It was during this holiday, surrounded by a family where the father openly showed affection and interest in his children, that I realized what I'd been missing my entire life. My roommate's father asked detailed questions about my studies, remembered details I'd mentioned in previous conversations, and treated me with a warmth that made my own father's indifference even more glaring by comparison. I returned to campus with a newfound understanding of what healthy fatherhood looked like, which only deepened my resentment. In New York, I built a surrogate family among friends and mentors. My academic advisor took a special interest in my progress, offering guidance and support that felt paternal in the best sense. My circle of friends provided the emotional connection I'd always craved, celebrating my successes and supporting me through difficulties. By junior year, I had established a life almost entirely separate from my father. I'd call on his birthday, and major holidays, brief obligatory conversations that neither of us seemed to enjoy. I'd visit Minnesota once a year, usually staying with Mum and seeing Dad for a single awkward lunch. During these rare encounters, he'd invariably spend most of the time talking about Lily and Emma's accomplishments. Lily got accepted to Northwestern, or Emma is captain of the debate team now. He'd share these updates with evident pride, seemingly oblivious to how each comparison twisted the knife deeper. I graduated from NYU with honors in marketing and communications. Mum flew out for the ceremony, staying a week to explore New York with me. Dad sent a congratulatory text message and a check that felt more like an attempt to fulfill a financial obligation than a meaningful gesture. The message read, "Congratulations on graduating. Sorry can't be there. Emma has a regional volleyball tournament this weekend. Good luck with job hunting." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a final door close on any hope for reconciliation. My father had made his priorities clear, and I had accepted that I wasn't among them. At 25, I had built a successful career as a marketing executive for a digital media company in Manhattan. My apartment in Brooklyn became my sanctuary, a space entirely my own, free from the emotional baggage of my childhood home. I dated casually, but struggled to form deep connections, always keeping potential partners at arm's length. I have trust issues, I explained to my therapist, Stepdaughters. Winters, whom I'd continued seeing in New York. Every time I start getting close to someone, I find myself waiting for them to disappoint me or lose interest. That's a common response to parental abandonment, she observed. You learned early that the person who should have loved you unconditionally didn't, so you protect yourself by expecting disappointment. These sessions helped me understand my patterns, but breaking them proved challenging. I maintained regular contact with Mum, who had begun travelling more since my departure, finally pursuing her own interests after years of being the sole engaged parent. Our relationship had evolved into a friendship between adults, though she still occasionally urged reconciliation with my father. "He asks about you," she'd say during our weekly calls. "He keeps that photo from your graduation on his desk." One photo doesn't make up for a lifetime of absence, I'd reply, unwilling to be swayed by such minimal effort. My relationship with my father had settled into a distant pattern. Birthday and Christmas cards exchanged. Occasional text messages that rarely went beyond surface pleasantries. Annual visits to Minnesota where I'd see him briefly, usually in group settings, that minimized the need for direct interaction. During these visits, I'd observe his interactions with my stepsisters, with a mixture of resentment and sad fascination. Both girls had thrived under his attentive parenting. Lily had graduated from Northwestern and was working at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. Emma was studying engineering at MIT, her education fully funded by my father. Meanwhile, I was still paying off substantial student loans from NYU. Dad had contributed the bare minimum to my education, citing financial constraints that somehow didn't apply to his stepdaughter's college funds. My stepsisters and I maintained a cordial but distant relationship. They couldn't understand my coolness toward the man they experienced as a devoted father. From their perspective, I was the prickly, resentful stepsister who refused to appreciate their wonderful dad. Thomas has done so much for us, Lily once told me during a rare moment alone together at a family gathering. I don't understand why you can't see how great he is. I didn't bother explaining. How could I make her understand that the Thomas she knew was a completely different person from the father I'd grown up with? The annual Christmas gathering at Dad and Veronica's house became a particularly difficult obligation. Each year, I'd force myself to attend for a few hours, watching as Dad played the role of jovial family patriarch, distributing thoughtful gifts to his stepdaughters, and receiving their affectionate thanks with evident pleasure. The walls of their home were covered with family photos chronicling vacations, graduations, and celebrations. I appeared in exactly 2 of these images, my smile stiff and eyes distant. One from Dad and Veronica's wedding, where I'd stood awkwardly at the edge of the group photo. Another from Lily's college graduation, where I'd attended out of politeness when visiting Mom the same weekend. The Christmas I turned 28, I met Michael at a colleague's holiday party. Unlike previous relationships, this one didn't follow my usual pattern of initial interest, followed by deliberate distance. Michael was patient and perceptive, recognizing my defenses without taking offense when I retreated. "I know you're waiting for me to disappoint you," he said one evening after I'd cancelled plans at the last minute, a typical avoidance tactic. "But I'm not going anywhere, Noelle. Not unless you really want me to." His persistence and genuine care gradually broke through barriers I'd maintained for years. After 6 months of dating, I finally shared the full story of my relationship with my father. Michael listened without judgment, his anger on my behalf both validating and comforting. "Have you ever told your father exactly how his behavior affected you?" he asked. I shook my head. "What's the point? He's not going to suddenly become the father I needed." "Maybe not," Michael agreed. "But saying it out loud might help you regardless of his response." Michael encouraged me to address my family issues rather than simply managing them from a distance. With his support, I began setting clearer boundaries around holiday visits while also attempting more honest communication. The results were mixed. Mum responded well to directness, but Dad seemed bewildered by my attempts at deeper conversation. "I don't know what you want from me, Noelle," he said during one particularly strained phone call. "We talk. I ask about your job. What more should we be discussing?" His inability to recognize the emotional chasm between us only reinforced my decision to maintain limited contact. Yet Michael's influence had planted a seed. Perhaps someday I would find the courage to speak the whole truth to my father, not for his benefit, but for my own healing. As our relationship deepened, Michael became my partner in navigating family obligations. He accompanied me to Minnesota for holidays, providing a buffer and support during uncomfortable family gatherings. His presence made these visits more bearable, giving me someone who saw and understood the dynamics I was experiencing. During one Thanksgiving visit, we witnessed my father paying for both Lily and Emma's graduate school tuitions, announcing it proudly during dinner. Emma was pursuing a master's in architecture at his alma mater, following directly in his professional footsteps, while Lily was attending business school. "I want my girls to focus on their education without financial stress," Dad declared, raising a glass in their direction. Later that night, in the privacy of our hotel room, I broke down. "I'm still paying off undergraduate loans while he funds their second degrees." I sobbed against Michael's shoulder. "It's not even about the money. It's what it represents. He will never see me the way he sees them." Michael held me through this breakdown, his quiet support a contrast to my father's lifelong emotional absence. "His limitations aren't your fault," he reminded me, "and they don't define your worth. By 30, I had achieved significant professional success and found genuine love with Michael, yet the wound of my father's preferential treatment remained unhealed. Each visit home revealed new examples of the disparity. Dad had helped Emma buy her first condo, co-signing her mortgage. He'd used his professional connections to help Lily secure a prestigious position at a top marketing firm. Meanwhile, he'd never once offered to leverage his extensive professional network for my benefit, despite working in adjacent industries. When I'd landed my current position through my own hard work and networking, his congratulations had been perfunctory at best. My stepsisters couldn't understand the growing distance between us. From their perspective, I was the ungrateful daughter who refused to appreciate all that Thomas provided. They couldn't see that what hurt most wasn't what he gave them, but what he'd never offered me, his time, attention, and genuine interest. At 34, I'd reached a place of relative peace regarding my father. I'd accepted that we would never have the relationship I'd longed for as a child. Michael and I had built a life together in New York, recently purchasing our first apartment in Brooklyn. My career continued to flourish, and we'd begun discussing marriage and starting a family of our own. Then the invitation arrived. Emma, now 28, was getting married to her college sweetheart, James. The elaborate invitation suite included multiple events spanning a long weekend in Minneapolis, culminating in a ceremony at one of the city's most exclusive venues. My initial instinct was to decline. I sent my regrets for the bridal shower and bachelorette party, but left the wedding response card blank, unsure how to proceed. "You should go," Michael urged when I shared my hesitation. "Not for your father, or even for Emma, but for yourself. Maybe seeing this event from an adult perspective will provide some closure." After much deliberation, I sent in the RSVP card, marking 2 attendees. Michael would accompany me, providing both moral support and a reason to engage with others when family interactions became too difficult. We arrived in Minneapolis 2 days before the wedding, staying with Mum, rather than at the designated hotel block. The rehearsal dinner was my first encounter with the full family in nearly 2 years, and the differences in my father's behaviour toward me versus his stepdaughters remained painfully apparent. Dad greeted Lily with a warm embrace and inside jokes. He fussed over Emma the bride, ensuring she had everything she needed and beaming with unmistakable pride. When I approached, his handshake was formal, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Noelle, good to see you. How's New York?" A brief generic inquiry, followed by a quick pivot to greet other guests. No real interest in my response, no follow-up questions. The pattern established over decades continued uninterrupted. The wedding preparations revealed the depth of Dad's involvement in Emma's life. He had apparently helped design aspects of the venue, leveraging his architectural expertise to create custom features for his stepdaughter's special day. He'd been involved in menu tastings, floral selections, and even music choices, details I learned, not from him, but from overheard conversations. The morning of the wedding, I watched from a distance as photographers captured getting ready moments with the bridal party. Dad stopped by the bridal suite, bringing Emma a blue vintage handkerchief that had belonged to his mother. Something old and something blue. He said, his voice thick with emotion as he tucked it into her bouquet. "My mother would have loved you, Emma. She always wanted a daughter who shared her creative spirit." I stood frozen in the doorway, invisible to the scene unfolding before me. My grandmother had died when I was 16. She'd left me her pearl earrings in her will, but Dad had never mentioned that she'd wanted a granddaughter with specific qualities. The casual remark felt like another erasure of my existence, another indication that I had somehow failed to meet expectations I'd never even known existed. During the ceremony, Dad walked Emma down the aisle, his face a study in paternal pride and joy. He delivered a heartfelt speech at the reception, choking up as he called Emma the daughter he always dreamed of, and praising her accomplishments, personality, and the happiness she'd brought into his life. I sat at my assigned table, gripping Michael's hand beneath the tablecloth, struggling to maintain composure. The speech continued with Dad expressing similar sentiments about Lily, describing his stepdaughters as the greatest gifts in his life. Throughout the reception, I moved through conversations, mechanically accepting congratulations on my recent promotion from relatives who seemed surprised I'd achieved professional success. Several of Dad's longtime friends approached with variations of the same comment. "Thomas is such a wonderful father to his girls," one older couple remarked. "He never stops talking about Emma and Lily. He's so involved in their lives." Each such comment added to the simmering anger building inside me. I maintained a neutral expression, years of practice, allowing me to mask my true feelings in these situations. But as the evening progressed and champagne flowed, my carefully constructed facade began to crack. The breaking point came during the father-daughter dance. Dad and Emma swayed to Daughters by John Mayer, their foreheads touching as they spoke quiet words meant only for each other. The genuine affection between them was undeniable, a public display of the bond I'd been denied throughout my life. As they finished their dance to enthusiastic applause, I slipped outside to the venue's garden terrace, needing air and distance from the celebration of a relationship that highlighted the absence of my own. I stood alone among carefully manicured shrubs, breathing deeply to compose myself, when I overheard voices around the corner. Dad was speaking with a colleague I recognized from his firm. "Beautiful wedding," the colleague was saying. "You must be so proud." "Proudest day of my life," Dad replied. "Nothing compares to seeing your child this happy." "How many daughters do you have again?" the colleague asked. There was a pause, brief but significant. Then Dad's voice clear and unequivocal. "2 wonderful girls. Lily's in Chicago now doing amazingly well in marketing. And Emma, of course, following me into architecture." As he continued showing pictures on his phone describing Lily and Emma's accomplishments in detail, something inside me finally snapped. The cumulative weight of years of neglect, followed by witnessing his capacity for fatherly love, directed exclusively toward his stepdaughters, became unbearable. I stepped around the corner, interrupting their conversation. "May I speak with you privately?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the emotions churning inside me. Dad looked startled but nodded, excusing himself from his colleague. We moved to a more secluded area of the garden, the sounds of the reception fading behind us. "Is something wrong?" he asked, checking his watch. "They'll be cutting the cake soon." "You told him you have 2 daughters, I said without preamble. Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Noelle, this isn't the time for this conversation." "When is the time? You've had 34 years to have this conversation with me, and you've never found the time." His expression hardened. "What exactly do you want from me? I've always provided for you. I paid for your education. I've never failed in my responsibilities." The word responsibilities ignited something in me. Responsibilities? Is that all I've ever been to you? An obligation? A responsibility to fulfill? That's not what I meant. He backpedaled, glancing toward the reception, clearly anxious to return. "Why could you be a father to them, but not to me?" I asked the question I'd carried for decades, finally spoken aloud. "I've watched you with Lily and Emma for years. The way you support them, celebrate them, take genuine interest in their lives. You've never once shown me even a fraction of that attention or care." Dad's face registered shock, then defensiveness. "I'm a different person now than I was when you were growing up. I've learnt from my mistakes." "Mistakes," I repeated. "Is that what I was to you? A mistake you learnt from, so you could be a better father to someone else's children?" "That's not fair," he protested, his voice rising. "I did the best I could with you." "No, you didn't," I countered, years of suppressed hurt flooding out. "You did the bare minimum. You were physically present sometimes, but emotionally absent always. You never knew my friends' names, my favorite subjects, what books I read, what dreams I had. You missed recitals and games and parent-teacher conferences. You forgot birthdays or treated them as obligations to be discharged with gift cards. And then I watched you become Father of the Year for Lily and Emma, proving you were capable of being a real dad all along." Dad's expression cycled through shock, anger, and something that might have been shame. "I was younger then," he attempted. "I was focused on my career. Things were different with your mother and me. Do you have any idea what it was like?" I continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. "To grow up believing there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made my own father unable to love me, to then watch you shower that love on your stepdaughters, confirming that the problem was never your capacity to love, but your choice not to love me." "That's not true," he protested weakly. "I've always loved you." "Love isn't just a word, Dad. It's actions, it's presence, it's interest and effort and time. You've given all those things to Lily and Emma. You've given me none of them." Our raised voices had drawn attention. Veronica appeared at the garden entrance, followed closely by Lily. Emma remained inside, protected from the disruption on her special day. "What's going on?" Veronica asked, her expression concerned as she approached. "Nothing," Dad said quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said, past caring about propriety or timing. "It's 34 years of neglect that I've finally found the courage to name." Lily stepped forward defensively. "How can you say that Dad has always been there for all of us?" The "all of us" struck me as the final insult, rewriting a history she hadn't witnessed. "You have no idea what you're talking about," I told her, my voice breaking. The father you know bears no resemblance to the father I grew up with. The confrontation escalated as more family members gathered. Mum appeared, having been alerted by another guest, her face reflecting concern and something like vindication, as though relieved the truth was finally being spoken. What had begun as a private confrontation became a very public airing of family dysfunction. Voices raised, tears fell, and decades of unspoken resentment surfaced in the worst possible setting. Emma eventually appeared in her wedding gown, distressed by the commotion at her reception. Seeing the bride's distress snapped me back to awareness of our surroundings. "I'm sorry," I said to Emma, meaning it despite everything. This isn't about you, and I never intended to disrupt your wedding." I turned to the assembled family members, many of whom were staring in shock at the unprecedented scene. I'm done pretending we're one big happy family when the truth is anything but. Gathering what dignity remained, I found Michael in the crowd. Took his hand and walked away from the reception and symbolically from the pretense that had defined my relationship with my father for as long as I could remember. As we drove away from the venue, the weight of what had just happened settled over me. "I've ruined Emma's wedding," I said, tears finally breaking through. "You spoke your truth," Michael replied gently. Maybe the timing wasn't ideal, but the words needed to be said. Back at Mum's house, my phone exploded with messages. Angry texts from my stepsisters accused me of selfishness and attention-seeking. Veronica sent a lengthy message expressing disappointment in my inappropriate behaviour. Extended family members weighed in with various degrees of shock and judgment. From my father came a single text: "I'm sorry you feel that way. I never meant to hurt you." The non-apology placing the issue on my feelings rather than his actions only confirmed that he still didn't understand the depth of what had transpired between us. The days following Emma's wedding were chaotic. I returned to New York with Michael emotionally exhausted, but also experiencing an unexpected sense of relief. Speaking my truth after decades of silent suffering had released something within me despite the messy and public nature of the confrontation. Mum called the day after we returned home. "I should have done more," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "I knew how he was treating you wasn't right, but I kept encouraging you to maintain the relationship, thinking things would improve." "You did the best you could," I assured her, recognizing the impossible position she'd been in as the buffer between my father and me. During this conversation, Mum revealed something she'd kept from me for years. "There's something you should know about your father," she said hesitantly. "Something that might help you understand, though it doesn't excuse his behavior." She explained that Dad had never wanted children. Their marriage had been struggling even before my conception, and Mum had hoped a baby would bring them closer. Dad had reluctantly agreed, believing a child might save their failing relationship. "He resented the pregnancy from the beginning," Mum admitted. "He saw you as a complication rather than a blessing. I kept thinking his feelings would change once you were born, that he'd fall in love with you when he held you. And he tried in his way, but there was always this distance." This revelation struck me like a physical blow. The root of my father's emotional absence wasn't some mysterious deficiency in me, but a fundamental truth about his own desires and choices. He hadn't wanted to be a father when I was born, a fact that explained so much about our relationship, but also opened new wounds. "Why did you stay with him for 15 years if you knew he didn't want me?" I asked, struggling to process this new information. "I thought I could make it work," Mum replied. "I thought if I loved you enough it would compensate. And there were times when he seemed to be trying. It wasn't all bad, Noelle. There were moments when I thought he was coming around." This conversation triggered a new wave of emotional processing. I broke down with Michael that evening, finally understanding the foundation of my relationship with my father. "He never wanted me," I repeated through tears. "How do you recover from knowing you were unwanted from the very beginning?" Michael held me through the storm of grief and anger. "His inability to embrace fatherhood was his failure, not yours," he reminded me. "And regardless of how your life began, you were always worthy of love and attention." Meanwhile, the family fallout continued. My stepsisters maintained a united front of anger and disappointment, defending their father while dismissing my experiences. Extended family members took sides, some reaching out with support, others condemning my selfish outburst at Emma's wedding. Dad himself made several attempts at contact in the weeks following the confrontation. His messages evolved from defensive to increasingly desperate as he sensed the finality of the rupture between us. "Can we please talk about this?" one text read. "I want to explain my side." "I know I wasn't perfect," said another, "but I always cared about you, Noelle. The most revealing message came 3 weeks after the wedding. "I never knew you felt this way. Why didn't you say something sooner?" This last message crystallized my decision. After decades of emotional neglect, followed by watching his capable fathering of his stepdaughters, he still couldn't recognize the impact of his behavior without it being explicitly spelled out. The burden had always been placed on me to bridge the gap he had created. After careful consideration and several sessions with my therapist, I wrote my father a formal letter ending our relationship. The letter was neither angry nor accusatory, but clear and final. "I've spent my life trying to understand why I wasn't enough to earn your attention and love." I wrote, "I've watched you give freely to Lily and Emma what you withheld from me. I no longer have the emotional energy to maintain a relationship that has caused me so much pain. I wish you well, but I need to prioritize my own well-being by stepping away from this dynamic permanently." Dad's response was immediate and uncharacteristically emotional. He called repeatedly, left voicemails pleading for another chance, and even contacted Mum asking her to intervene. When these attempts failed, he escalated to showing up at my apartment in New York, creating a scene in the lobby when I refused to come down. "I'm your father," he shouted, according to the doorman, who eventually had to ask him to leave. "You can't just cut me out of your life." The irony of his sudden, desperate desire for connection after a lifetime of disinterest wasn't lost on me. Now that I was asserting control over the relationship by ending it, he was fighting to maintain it with an intensity he'd never shown while it existed. Various family members pressured me to reconcile. "He's still your father," Aunt Sarah insisted during a phone call. "Family is family no matter what." "He's getting older," Uncle Mark pointed out. "Do you want to live with regrets if something happens to him?" Even Lily reached out, her anger softened somewhat. "He's really torn up about this," she said. "I've never seen him like this. He barely eats, hardly sleeps. Couldn't you just talk to him?" I maintained my boundary despite these pressures. My therapist supported this decision, helping me recognize that the guilt others tried to instill was not mine to carry. "You're not obligated to maintain relationships that harm you, even with family," Dr. Winters assured me. "Sometimes the healthiest choice is to step away." This boundary setting marked a turning point in my healing. For the first time, I was prioritizing my emotional well-being over family expectations or societal pressures to reconcile. The decision brought both grief and liberation, a complex mixture of loss for what might have been, and relief from the constant disappointment of what was. 6 months passed without contact with my father. The first month was the hardest, with continued pressure from family members and my own moments of doubt and guilt. But gradually, a sense of peace began to replace the turmoil. I continued therapy, working through the complex emotions surrounding my childhood and the recent confrontation. "I keep waiting to regret my decision," I told Dr. Winters during one session, "but mostly I feel relief." "That relief is telling you something important," she replied. "It's confirming that this boundary was necessary for your well-being." My relationship with Michael deepened during this period of healing. His steady support never wavered, even during my most difficult moments. We began discussing marriage more seriously, planning a future together that would be built on mutual respect and genuine emotional connection, everything my parents' marriage had lacked. Surprisingly, it was Lily who reached out first among my estranged family members. Her initial messages were cautious, asking how I was doing rather than pressuring me about my father. After several exchanges, she suggested meeting for coffee during an upcoming business trip to New York. I agreed with some trepidation. We met at a quiet cafe in Chelsea, both of us nervous and uncertain about how to navigate this new territory. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the wedding," Lily began after we'd exchanged pleasantries. "About Dad being a different person with us than he was with you." I nodded, bracing for defensiveness or dismissal. Instead, Lily surprised me. "I wanted you to know that he wasn't perfect with us either," she said carefully. "He was definitely more involved than what you've described from your childhood, but there were still issues. He missed things. He was distracted by work sometimes. He could be emotionally distant when stressed." This admission startled me. "But the way he talks about you and Emma, it sounds like he was father of the year." Lily smiled sadly. "He tries harder with us because of what happened with you." Mum told us that much. She said he was determined not to repeat the same mistakes. But that doesn't mean he suddenly became the perfect dad. We talked for hours, sharing perspectives on the man we both knew in such different ways. Lily's willingness to see beyond her own experience and acknowledge mine marked the beginning of a more honest relationship between us. As spring turned to summer, Michael proposed during a weekend trip to the Berkshires. His thoughtful, intimate proposal reflected his understanding of who I truly was, a stark contrast to my father's lifelong failure to know me. Planning our wedding brought the question of my father's role to the forefront. Traditional expectations suggested he should walk me down the aisle, but nothing about our relationship fit tradition. "Do you want to invite him?" Michael asked, careful to frame the question without judgment. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me thinks it would be easier to just exclude him entirely. As I contemplated this decision, a handwritten letter arrived from my father. Unlike his previous attempts at contact, this one showed a level of reflection I'd never witnessed from him. "I've been thinking constantly about everything you said," he wrote. "At first I was defensive and hurt, but I've come to realize you were right about so much. I failed you as a father, not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't know how to be the father you deserved. By the time I figured it out with Lily and Emma, I'd already lost your trust. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I recognize what I did and didn't do. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I needed you to know that I see now what I couldn't see then." The letter continued acknowledging specific instances of neglect and expressing genuine remorse without excuses. It ended not with a plea for reconciliation, but with an expression of respect for my boundaries and wishes. "Whatever you decide about our relationship going forward, I support your choice. I lost the right to a place in your life through my own actions. I only hope that someday you might consider allowing me to apologize in person." The sincerity of the letter, so different from his initial defensive reactions, gave me pause. After discussing it with both Michael and Dr. Winters, I decided to meet my father for lunch, a neutral setting with clear time boundaries. We met at a restaurant halfway between New York and Minneapolis, both of us having traveled to reach this middle ground. Dad looked older, the months of estrangement having left visible marks. He waited for me to speak first, another departure from his usual behavior. "Thank you for your letter," I began. "It was the first time I felt you really heard what I've been trying to tell you for years." Dad nodded, his eyes unusually bright. "I should have listened long ago. There's no excuse for how blind I was to your feelings." What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. For the first time, my father listened without defensiveness as I described the impact of his emotional absence throughout my childhood. He didn't interrupt or make excuses, simply absorbed the truth of my experience. "I didn't know how to be a father when you were born," he admitted, echoing what Mum had told me. "Your mother wanted a child so badly, and I thought agreeing would fix our marriage. But then you arrived, and I felt nothing but panic and inadequacy. I retreated into work because it was the one place I felt competent." "And with Lily and Emma?" I asked. By then I'd had years to observe other fathers. "Veronica also pushed me to be more involved, something your mother tried to do, but I wasn't ready to hear. And yes, I was determined not to repeat the same mistakes. But Noelle, that was never about you not being enough. It was always about my failures, never yours." This conversation didn't magically heal decades of hurt, but it opened a door I'd thought permanently closed. We parted with a tentative agreement to maintain limited contact with clear boundaries and expectations on both sides. When Michael and I set our wedding date, I made a decision that felt right for me. I would invite my father as a guest, but I asked my mother's brother, Uncle David, who had been a supportive presence throughout my life, to walk me down the aisle. "I understand," Dad said when I explained my decision. "I'm grateful to be included at all." The wedding day arrived, a beautiful autumn celebration in the Hudson Valley. Dad attended with appropriate restraint, neither attempting to claim a central role nor withdrawing entirely. He offered a brief, sincere toast at the reception, acknowledging that Michael provided the unconditional love and support that he had failed to give. As I danced with Uncle David during the father-daughter dance, I caught sight of my father watching from the sidelines, a complex mixture of regret and acceptance on his face. In that moment, I felt a sense of closure. I had created a celebration that honored my journey and my choices, not the expectations or traditions that had failed me. The relationship with my father continues to evolve at a careful distance. We speak occasionally with the understanding that trust must be rebuilt slowly, if at all. I've made peace with the possibility that we may never have the father-daughter bond I longed for as a child. Instead, we have a cautious adult relationship based on new understanding and clearer boundaries. The greatest healing has come through my relationship with Michael and the family we're building together. As we discuss having children of our own, I find myself committed to breaking the pattern of emotional distance that marked my childhood. Any child we have will know they are wanted, loved, and valued from the very beginning. I've learnt that family is both what we're born into and what we create for ourselves. While I can't change the father I had growing up, I can choose the kind of parent I will be, ensuring that the legacy of emotional distance ends with me. Have you ever had to cut off contact with a parent or family member for your own well-being? How did you handle setting those boundaries? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about healing from family trauma. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that prioritizing your mental health sometimes means making difficult choices about family relationships.